Let's continue our discussion on the importance of self-awareness and how becoming more self-aware is a key component of holistic leadership health. When I was younger, I loved roller coaster rides. I loved the thrill and anticipation of each and every twist and turn. The excitement in me would climb as the roller coaster would climb to its highest peaks, and then I would laugh uncontrollably as the coaster would drop to its lowest valleys. The ride would finish, and I would get back in line, and I would go all over again. I could ride roller coasters all day long and experience each ride with the thrill and excitement of the first. Now that I'm older, I don't enjoy roller coaster rides. I am a one and done kind of person. If you get me on the roller coaster, I am the backpack and water holder for the rest of the trip. I get nauseous and dizzy every time that my kids convince me to ride the Superman with them at Six Flags. Now, isn't ministry a lot like a roller coaster? There's so much thrill and anticipation at every turn. There are emotional highs and emotional lows. One moment we're having a powerful encounter in prayer as someone is set free from addiction, and the next moment someone is criticizing our sermon or our ministry method or even our character. We can land dizzy and nauseous and unsure how to navigate the sharp twists and turns, the ministry mountains, and the emotional valleys. So what do we do? In the midst of impermanence and unpredictability, how do we become more individually self-aware and work towards being an emotionally mature leader regardless of circumstances? Let's look at our definition for self-awareness again. Self-awareness is understanding how internal and external factors influence my emotional state and the responses they trigger. Processing through our emotional state can be a challenging task. I want to remind you that self-awareness is just as much a skill as it is an approach to life and thinking. Throughout the New Testament, we can look to the Apostle Paul as a model for us who regularly practice the skill of self-awareness. In Galatians 5:17, we can see Paul conscious of the influence of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the spirit, and the spirit what is contrary to the flesh. In 2 Corinthians 11:30, Paul is aware of his weakness. If I must boast, I will boast in the things that show my weakness. In Philippians 3, verses 4 through 14, Paul talks about his background and his history and how it impacts his present ministry. Just take a moment and read through Paul's letters, and you will find many more examples of Paul practicing the skill of self-awareness. And what I find so encouraging about Paul's example is that because Paul was a self-aware leader, he was able to use his awareness of his strengths, of his weaknesses, of his habitual tendencies, and he was able to apply them to his interactions with others. Paul engaged in more effective ministry because he was a self-aware leader. You might be saying to yourself, yeah, I get it. I see the examples. I understand why self-awareness is an important part of holistic leadership health. But how do I know if I'm growing in self-awareness? I want to share several measurable behaviors with you as a foundation for how we see this area of health show up in leaders. As I present these measurable behaviors, I will offer simple and practical tips paired with questions for reflection to help you take a step towards growth in your individual self-awareness. Before we jump in, I want to remind you that understanding our emotions does not mean that we only evaluate negative emotions that we feel. As we work through these measurables, I want to encourage you to look at both the positive and the negative emotions that you experience and the responses that they trigger. So here we go. Number 1, I am secure in both my awareness of my strengths and weaknesses, as well as the feedback I receive from others as they experience them. Here's one quick and simple way that you can begin to explore and gain an awareness of your strengths and weaknesses. I want you to take a moment and write down your 5 greatest strengths, and then write down your 5 greatest weaknesses. Try to stick to adjectives rather than writing sentences. You can words like dependable, patient, bold, introverted, nervous. This next step can be a little bit more difficult. I want you to go to your spouse, a close friend, a mentor, and have them write down your 5 greatest strengths and your 5 greatest weaknesses. Bear with me, don't skip this step because it's important. I want you to gather responses from 3 to 5 trusted individuals. Where do the strengths that you wrote down overlap with the strengths that they wrote down? Where do your weaknesses overlap the weaknesses that they wrote down? Now, let's take a look for a moment at the strengths and weaknesses that your friends wrote down that were not on your list. These strengths and weaknesses are a potential blind spot. Which of these strengths and weaknesses caught you by surprise? Why? Evaluating our weaknesses is not something that most of us are inclined to do. It's uncomfortable and it can feel too vulnerable, especially when we're inviting others to give us feedback about our weaknesses. Tim Keller commented, "If I'm in denial about my own weaknesses and sin, then there will be a concomitant blindness to the greatness and glory of God." It's when we understand and when we evaluate our strengths and weaknesses that we begin to see the glory of God revealed in us as the Holy Spirit helps us to lean into our strengths and overcome our weaknesses. Number 2, when presented with a decision, I'm aware of the specific emotions informing each course of action. On another piece of paper, I want you to write down a decision that you made. It could be as easy as choosing to pick up the phone when you see the caller ID versus letting it go to voicemail, or waking up and choosing to go to the gym today versus staying home. Or you could look at a more difficult decision that you've made recently. When you made that decision, what were the emotions that you were feeling? Were the emotions that you experienced positive or negative? How did your emotional state impact the decision that you made? When we understand the emotions that we feel when we're presented with a decision, we can identify the healthy and the unhealthy decision-making tendencies that we gravitate towards based off of our current emotional state. Making emotionally aware decisions will always lead to the best desired outcomes. Number 3, I reflect on the source of my emotions, my responses to them, and how they influence my behavior. When reflecting on this measurable behavior, it's important to evaluate situations where you've had a positive response and situations where you've had a negative response. The goal here is to be aware of your full range of emotions, not just your negative emotions. Now, when looking at this measurable, I find it particularly helpful to work through this with a trusted individual. Think about a situation where you felt a strong emotion. What were the emotions that you were feeling? What triggered those emotions? What is your habitual response to those specific emotions? Another way to look at this question is when you experience this emotion in the past, what are the responses that you naturally gravitate towards? Does your habitual response to that emotion honor Christ? Why or why not? What does God require of you in regard to that habitual response? When we can begin to understand how internal and external triggers impact our patterns of thinking and our behaviors, we gain awareness of our situational tendencies. And this is key in developing new patterns of thinking and new patterns of behaving, not only in our personal life, but also in our leadership. Number 4, I adhere to a strict rhythm of speaking with someone, a mentor, a coach, a therapist, about my emotional well-being. Now, this is an important part of self-care as pastors and leaders. In a recent study by Barna, when asked if they prioritize self-care, 45% of pastors were either neutral or they disagreed that they prioritize self-care. One of my personal values and one of the core values at the church that I lead is everything is better in teams. And the truth is that we're better together. When we adhere to strict rhythms of speaking with someone about our emotional well-being, practicing the skill of self-awareness becomes a regular part of our life and our leadership. And so I want to ask you, who's on your personal growth team? Who do you talk to consistently and intentionally about your emotional well-being? If you're apprehensive about discussing your emotional well-being, describe your apprehension. If you do not currently have a strict rhythm of speaking with someone about your emotional well-being, who do you need to pull on your personal growth team? a mentor, a coach, a therapist to help you process your emotional health. Number 5, prior to entering a specific situation, I prepare by considering the variety of emotions that I may experience and their effects on my actions and decision making. Think about a situation that you know that you're going to encounter in the near future. What are the internal and external triggers that you may encounter in that situation? How do those triggers impact your emotional state? What are the emotions that you may encounter in that situation? How have you reacted to those emotions in the past? These are the 5 measurable behaviors that you can use to assess and help yourself become more individually self-aware. Being aware of how external and internal factors influence your emotional state and the responses that they trigger will not only help you to express your full range of emotions more clearly and intentionally, it will help you to lead yourself and lead your teams well, regardless of the circumstances you encounter. As we wrap up this video, I want to offer you some encouragement. 1 Peter 1:3 says, "His divine power has given us everything that we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness." Now, maybe working through these measurable behaviors and question exercises has been challenging for you. Maybe it's revealed some unhealthy tendencies that you have when you're emotionally charged. This is a perfect time to stop and offer your thoughts, your emotions, and your reactions to the Lord in prayer. Invite the Holy Spirit to help you process all of this new awareness in a way that honors God. Ask God to help you uncover your blind spots and reveal patterns of behavior that pose potential danger to you and to the people that you love and lead. As you continue on the journey of becoming a more self-aware leader, remember that it's not about a destination to be aspired to, but rather a commitment to understanding your full range of emotions in each new season and with each new experience that you encounter. On the days that you struggle to be more self-aware, lean into the words of Peter and trust that the Lord has given you everything that you need to live a godly life that honors him. Join me in the next video as we discuss how self-awareness applies in the context of leading teams and organizations and how you can help your team grow healthier in it.